الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes us of the followers of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, understanding his sunnah, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to answer correctly when questioned in the grave, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala resurrects us and puts us in the company of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam yawm al-qiyamah. باب وجوب أمر أهله وأولاده المميزين. The chapter of the obligation of the parent to command his children who are mumayyiz, meaning they understand the difference between what is right and what is wrong. وسائر من في رعيته, and everyone who is under that person's custody, بطاعة الله تعالى, with the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ونهيهم عن مخالفة وتأديبهم ومنعهم ارتكاب منهى عنه, and preventing them from going against anything which is forbidden, and giving them the best of akhlaq in the process of doing so. This is the chapter title that we have here from Riyadh, as-Saaleheen, which is compiled by Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah, and inshaAllah we'll go through some of the benefits and explanation from Shaykh Muhammad ibn Ustadh Ariff Olla rahimahullah. Now in this chapter we have 2 ayat and maybe about 3 or 4 ahadith. Here he is saying that it is wajib upon the parent to educate and to command his children to do that which is good in obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once they become at the age of tamyiz, then they must be commanded. And tamyiz here, he's able to understand. If you tell him this is good, if you tell him this is bad. And there is difference of opinion as to when that age begins, and inshallah when the hadith will cover that, because it alludes to that. And also it is wajib upon then the parent to stop them to do anything which is against the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to teach them with ta'deebihim, and to give them the best of adab and etiquettes and mannerisms. What are some of the evidences? Now we have 2 ayats from the Quran, but we have plenty of ayats in the Quran, as Shaykh Muhammad rahimahullah mentions, that this is the practice of the Anbiya and the Rusul. If you look at Surah Maryam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the prophets with their family members. If you look at Surah Anbiya, and the list goes on. But here in Surah Taha, which is chapter number 20, ayah number 132, وَأْمُرْ أَهْلَكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ وَاسْتَبِرْ عَلَيْهَا. Command your family to establish the salat and then to be patient upon it. This is now a command directed at those who are in charge of the family, and that could be the father, that could be the mother, if it's a single parent. But whoever a person is responsible for, not only does he have to now command himself, but he has to command his children also. In Surah Tahrim, ayah number 6, يَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ, O you believe, save yourselves and then your families, وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا, save yourselves and your families from the fire. So a person in this ayah can't say, well, I'm practicing, they can do what they want. I'm following Islam, but it's up to them, they can choose. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded here that the person who is in charge will be questioned. The person who has the ability, the person who has authority, the person who knows will be questioned, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding us to save ourselves as well as our family. If you love someone, part of ikhlas to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that you want that khair to spread, but also you want other people to be upon goodness. This is ikhlas, this is sincerity. If you see yourself as being guided and you don't want that for upon other people, or you don't care, then this is a form of arrogance. Shaykh Muhammad rahimahullah, in his commentary, he is saying here, وَوَجْهُ الْمُنَاسَبَةِ, and the reason why this is now connected to the previous chapters that we've been reading about We've previously been reading about the financial obligations of the parent upon his dependents. The Shaykh is saying here, just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded upon the parent to nourish the body, there is now a command upon the parent to nourish the soul. وَأَوَّلْ مَا يُؤْمَرْ بِهِ وَأَوْجَبْ وَأَفْضَلْ هِيَ الصَّلَاةِ. After explaining to them Tawheed and the oneness of Allah and staying away from shirk, priority then should be given to, as Shaykh is saying here, to establishing the salat and to be patient upon it. Now this is really important. As long as a person has salat, even if his child doesn't listen to him, even if his child goes away from the correct path, if the child or the human being remains upon the salat is iman. He still has iman. He still has some kind of nur. It could be that they engage in all sorts of major sins, may Allah protect us and the Muslim youth. But as long as the person is establishing salat, and with that they are staying away from shirk and they're establishing some form of tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is hope for success. And in the akhirah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive everything except for ash-shirk and the abandonment of the salat. Therefore, the Shaykh is saying here, this is now important for us to understand, because our religion looks at both aspects, the dunya aspects as well as the akhirah aspects, which is wajib upon the parent to establish himself, but also teach and instruct his children with. A hadith which is reported by Bukhari and Muslim, which is agreed upon with authority of Abu Hurairah, that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ took Al-Hasan ibn Ali, so he's his grandson, radiallahu anhuma. Al-Hasan took a date which was reserved for sadaqah, which is reserved for zakat. Now we know that zakat is due on 4 things: gold and silver and anything which is similar to it, so currency, paper, money, etc. Livestock, camels, cows and sheep and ram. And agriculture, that which you bring out from the earth, as long as it is measured and stored, that is now zakatable if it meets the minimum nisab. And the 4th thing is trade goods. These 4 things are zakatable. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ had a stockpile of dates which had been given to him as part of zakat. Now the Messenger of Allah ﷺ and Al-Bayt, meaning the family of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, are not allowed to eat zakat. They are allowed to accept sadaqah, but they are not allowed to accept zakat. And this is from the hukm today. If you know somebody who is related to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, you cannot give that person zakat, as we will see from this narration. So Hassan ibn Ali, the young child, is the grandson of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. He found a date, he started eating it, as children might do. So the Messenger of Allah ﷺ took the date from him. In another narration, he actually took it out of his mouth like that, scooping it out, and he said, "Khukh, khukh," meaning this is a term of amazement from the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. And then he said, "Irmi biha," take it out of your mouth. "Ama alimta anna la na'kul as-sadaqah." He said, "Do you not know that we are not allowed to accept and eat from zakat?" Now, how is this related? This is related, as the Shaykh is saying here, that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ is teaching his children, his grandchildren, that which is wajib upon them, and staying away from that which is haram upon them. And he's teaching them from what is the best of adab. And he is teaching them with the best of adab. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. In another narration here in this same chapter, on the authority of Abu Hafs Umar ibn Abi Salama. Now here, this is important because we talked about this yesterday. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ married Salama, and she had a previous relationship with Abu Salama. Now she has got children into this relationship with the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. So now the Messenger of Allah ﷺ has got stepchildren that he's looking after. One of those stepchildren of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ is a child called Umar. Now the Messenger of Allah ﷺ in this hadith is sitting with Umar and they are eating food. And there is a plate in front of them. Now this child, Umar, he is looking at the plate, and anything that he wants to eat, he takes it and he eats it. From all different parts of the plate. He's just eating it. Without any kind of adab, without any kind of deliberation, he's just eating. So the Messenger of Allah ﷺ stops him and he says, Ya ghulam, O young boy, Samillah, first begin by mentioning the name of Allah. Don't just start eating like this. وَكُلْ بِيَمِينِكَ, and eat with your right hand. وَكُلْ مِمَّا يَلِيكَ, and eat what that is closest to you. The narrator here, who is the stepson of the Messenger of Allah, Umar, he said, I benefited from this advice from the Messenger of Allah ﷺ for the rest of my life, eating with the manners that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ taught me with here. This is now a narration which is agreed upon, Bukhari and Muslim. Now here we have the adab of eating. Our children need to be taught to mention the name of Allah. Our children need to be taught to eat with their right hands, eat that which is closest, eat as a servant eats, not to, stuff their faces and eat too much and to eat with haste. And they also need to be taught not to eat based on their desires, as the Messenger of Allah ﷺ is telling you here. Have some control to yourself. But also what we learn from the adab of eating and drinking is not to be wasteful. I mean, Shaykh Muhammad rahimahullah is going through the ahkam of eating and drinking and the different things that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ has said here. We're not going to go through all of it, but what is definitely apparent, especially here in the West, is that there is a lot of waste. Children, they take up a lot of food, or they don't finish their food, and there's a lot of leftover, and they just end up discarding that and throwing that in the bin. This is not from the etiquettes of eating at all whatsoever. But what we learn from this narration here, going back to the actual chapter, the Shaykh is saying, Shaykh Muhammad, in this narration we learn that even whilst the Messenger of Allah ﷺ was eating, he used this as a means for him to educate children, and he did it with the best of manners. And he did it whilst he saw the child doing something wrong, which is very important here, because in the previous narration we saw that also. So how did he do that? He didn't lose his temper, he didn't get angry. He taught them in a way which was going to benefit them. He didn't speak to them in a manner of arrogance. Now this is very important, because we're going to learn this point in the next two hadith, and that's all that remains from this chapter. Which is that when you are speaking to your child, the first person that should benefit is yourself. And then when you are speaking to them and educating them, it has to be in a point that they are going to benefit. If that is not going to be established, then you're not really establishing much. And it could also be that you're establishing your power and your authority and pride and perhaps arrogance over them. Hence the stepson of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, Umar ibn Abi Salama, he said that this was a piece of advice that I never forgot for the rest of my life. Why? Because the Messenger of Allah ﷺ did it in the correct manner. If we do it in the correct manner, as Shaykh Muhammad is saying here in his commentary, this will then remain imprinted in this person's life for as long as they can remember it. If a person wants to educate his child after a particular age, or he doesn't do it in the correct manner, then he won't have that same kind of benefit. So the Shaykh is saying here, Shaykh Muhammad, if a person fears Allah in his children, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will allow for the rights to be established. If a person doesn't fear Allah and his children, then it could be that he loses the rights of his children, and he will lose the trust and the relationship and the connection as well. Last two ahadith. Now this is something I'm pretty sure we've all heard before, on the authority of Amr ibn Shu'ayb and Abi and Jaddeh, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, "Muru awladakum bis-salat wa hum abna' sab'a-sinin." Teach your children to pray by the age of 7 years old. وَاضْرِبُوهُمْ عَلَيْهَا وَهُمْ أَبْنَاءَ عَشْرٍ. And hit them if you have to, or become even more strict with them if you have to at the age of 10. وَفَرِّقُ بَيْنَهُمْ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ. And separate them in their beds by the age of 10. So now here we're talking about segregation laws and rules by the age of 10. In the next narration, which is similar, but it's from a different companion, Abu Thurayya Juhani, he said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Allimu sabi salat li sab'a sinin." Teach children to pray by the age of 7. وَاضْرِبُوهُ عَلَيْهَا ibn 10 sinin. And then hit them if you have to, become even more strict and insist on it by the age of 10. And both of these narrations have been reported by Abu Dawood and others, and the hadith is sahih. Now here, like we said in the chapter title, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying at the age of 7. This is where the scholars have differed. In the chapter title it says here, teach your children and command them with what is obligatory, al-mumayyizeen, meaning they are able to understand the difference between what is right and what is wrong. The majority of the ulama have said the age of 7 is when it begins. To teach them for salat, teach them about siyam, teach them about all of the obligatory things, about the hijab, about all these other things. And now by the age of 10, they should have already received all of the information, education, and the practice in those 2.5, 3 years with those things which are obligatory and staying away from those things which are haram. Therefore, by the age of 10, they should be now beginning to practice Islam. Also from this narration we learn here, the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said by the age of 10, they should be split in their beds. Now, this is not like the beds that we have today. At the time of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, the children used to sleep in one bed, underneath one blanket, and it was quite often that the only type of garment that they had was enough to cover their awrah. And some people didn't even have that from the Ansar. So now, the Messenger of Allah ﷺ is saying here, normally in a situation, the boys and the girls would be sleeping together underneath one sheet. By the age of 10, you need to separate them. So if that's what's happening in bed, then that's happening in other scenarios as well, that they should now be taught about that segregation. What we learn from this, Shaykh Muhammad al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah is saying here, is that teaching your children has been made wajib upon the person who has authority over them. Because the Messenger of Allah ﷺ is not speaking to the child here, he's speaking to the parent. Teach them by the age of 7. Hit them and become even strict if you have to. Also from the benefits from this is that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ is saying here, hit them, but here this is very important, al-murad bid-darb alladhi yahsul bihi at-ta'deeb bila darar. This is really important. What is intended by the statement of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ where he says, "Dribuhum alayha," hit them for the salat at the age of 10, it is for the purpose of them understanding. It's not for the purpose for the parent getting angry and venting his anger. And like we have seen from the previous two narrations before, when the Messenger of Allah ﷺ saw something wrong, he spoke to his children or the people that were there so that they could benefit. He already knows the haqq. You as a parent already know what's right and what is wrong. So if you see something wrong in them, or you're getting frustrated about them doing something wrong, what point is there if you're getting angry and you're getting frustrated when they're not benefiting at all? All you're going to gain is more frustration and perhaps a lack of trust from your children. Hence, Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah is saying here, hitting has been made allowed for the purpose of them benefiting. So if you give them a hit, they understand now, look, I've done actually something which is really bad, next time I won't do it again. But hitting has conditions as well. He says, فَلَا يَجُوزْ لِلْأَبْ, and it is not permissible for the parent or the father أَن يَضْرِبْ أَوْلَادُهُ ضَرْبًا مُبَرِّحًا, that he hits his child which would leave a mark. leave a mark, let alone sending them to hospital or stitches, etc. The hit now is just a tap. What are you doing? To signify that this person has done something wrong. وَلَا يَجُوزُ, and it is not permissible, أَن يَضْرِبُهُمْ ضَرْبًا مُكَرِّرًا لَا حَاجَةَ إِلَيْهَا. It is not permissible for the father to continuously hit the child over and over again. There's no benefit. So what is the purpose? بل إذا احتاج إليه مثل أن لا يقوم الولد للصلاة إلا بالضرب فإنه يضربه ضرب غير مبرح. If he needs to hit, then he can only hit, which will not leave a mark. If he needs to repeat it, then he can repeat it. But the point here, he's saying here, beating them, continuously smacking them, for the purpose of you just letting out your anger, with them not benefiting in the slightest, that is not the meaning of the hadith. And the Messenger of Allah ﷺ came with the haqq and wisdom, and there is no wisdom in that. Also, the Shaykh is saying here, in this hadith we also learn that it is wajib upon the parent to educate his child, and he now needs to understand that sometimes he's going to be soft with them, and sometimes he needs to be firm and harsh with them. As for those people who are constantly harsh, then that is not correct. As for those people who are constantly lenient, then that is not correct. So from the benefits now, from this hadith here also, is that it is upon the parent to be wise and look at the outcome. If I'm going to be soft and the child will understand, then that's the objective that's being fulfilled. And the other way around also. Also from the benefits of this, and perhaps this is the final one, the Shaykh is saying here, I think that covers all of the benefits. So here, this is the chapter where the author, rahimahullah, has talked about the obligation of the parent to educate his child once they become of an age where they are able to understand the difference between what is right and what is wrong, teaching them to do what is from the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not saying that before that age they don't, but at least at this age now they need to start practicing Islam. And he forbids them from anything which is against the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he teaches them from the best of akhlaq. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he makes us of those who are upright in ourselves, and he makes us of the best of educators for our children and the coming generations, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects them from all forms of fitna, that which is apparent and that which is hidden, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us firm upon tawheed and upon the salat in a manner that he is pleased with us until we meet him. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.